Cottage. I'm a playwright. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, Lynn. I am Carmelita Tropicana. That is the name that I use as stage name. I also write under that name, and I'm a writer performer. And I started in the '80s, so it's a quite a trajectory. She, her.
Thank you.
And I pass it on to Stacy.
Thank you, Carmelita. I love your name, by the way. I love it, love it, love it. I'm Stacy Rose. I'm a playwright. I am talking to you today from Charlotte, North Carolina. My pronouns are she, hers, she, her, hers. I don't know. I'm in a really good mood today. So that's the thing I want you to know.
That's a great thing to know at the top.
Yeah.
And my name is Jenny Coons. I'm the co-artistic director of this season. Here we are, Theater for One, and I use pronouns she, her, and I am streaming to you from New York, New York. So I would love to start with just an opening question of what drew you to this experience in this moment and moment of time. What pulled you into this ask or platform, digital platform?
Sure, I can begin. I had the intense, strange, wonderful experience of seeing Theater for One on Governor's Island many years ago and being very fascinated by the intimacy of the medium, by the danger of just being an audience member and not knowing quite how to engage with someone who's looking you directly in the eyes. And I instantly wanted to create for Theater for One. And then a couple of years later, I got the invitation from Christine Jones, and I did Theater for One down in the financial district, which was just simply a wonderful experience. I got to work with a fabulous actor who was game and just delivered everything that I threw out at him. And so when Christine invited me to create something for this digital realm, at first I was hesitant because something that I really loved about Theater for One was the proximity of bodies in a space that feels confined. And I really love the intensity of the exchanging of energy between the performer and the audience member. And I was fearful that in this digital realm, that kind of connection would be lost. And then she talked me through the technology of how this was going to work. And she lured me in with the prospect of replicating that intimacy, via Zoom. And we all know, I mean, because of this COVID moment, Zoom is this entirely different, strange realm that most of us want to escape. So the idea of creating theater for it really made me super hesitant. But I was intrigued by the technology and the possibility of replicating the theatrical experience.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn. I've always just, I found my way into theater at 30. Well, I started grad school at 37. And so I didn't have all of like the traditional background. So I'm always someone who never was necessarily married to the way theater is supposed to happen. So that was already interesting to me. It's like, okay, so how do you make this interesting? And I was like interested, but like a little centered, like, how is it actually going to do the thing? And I can remember Christine and Brian and having that first meeting and then going through the walkthrough of the space. It was like, whoa. It was beyond. And I was like, okay, this is very exciting. So I need to figure out what feels like this. And it was good to do before I wrote too. So I'm glad I wasn't asked to write a piece and then shown the space. So I think what I wrote was very much like, oh, what experiences have I been through that feel like this? And I've been on a window visit to prison more than I care to name. And it is that. And it is it's a very weird, confining experience. And that's what I wrote towards. So it was very exciting for me.
Well, for me, I didn't know anything about Theater for One. So I came to it totally blind. And because I'm a performer, and I've done a lot of like improv type of stuff where I deal with the audience, very much directly. Sometimes it's presentational where I'm really talking to the audience. This sort of like seemed to me, oh, I don't really like Zoom, but I've done shows and I've done shows, for Zoom. So maybe I can figure out something to write, because if it is Here We Are, the only thing that I can think of, even though I do a lot of comedy and a lot of humor, somehow my humor was gone. It's a time where the humor, and I'm regaining it, but it really was gone. And for me, it was a time where I was really having conversations that were deeper than I've ever had with people, with my mother, who's 95, who's one of my pod people, and even with friends who I'd always been with. Things turned, and we were really having these discussions about racism that we'd never had before. It was kind of like, I'm progressive, but it didn't come into the conversation as deeply. So this was a time when she said, "Here we are." I was thinking, God, I've had pandemic fights, and that became the title of it. I've listened to people having fights. And so I was trying to figure out, it's changed us so much. And it's a time where I'm learning history that I wasn't taught. So all these things were really, the ask was really simple, because it was like, oh yeah, how can I not? This is really exciting. And also writing, for one, I've done those kinds of things because I've done monologues, but this was a totally different thing because it's mediated very differently. But I thought it was great. I can write something for someone else. Let someone else do it. And I love that. It was a freedom exercise. There's a lot of things that are freeing in this situation that we find ourselves in, because we have to invent.
Oh, thank you so much for those responses. Carmelita, you brought this up a little bit with the prompt, Here We Are, for this season. And Stacy, you talked about the form and when you experience the platform, what are other situations I've been in like this that feel like this? Would each of you talk a little bit about inspiration for this play that you wrote in this moment, Here We Are, in this new digital world we're in?
Up until very recently, actually, I was a practicing respiratory therapist. That's my last day was in May. And so I got to work some of the pandemic. And so had that, I kind of lived in this world where I had the isolation, but I didn't have the isolation. And the things that I wanted to be near were things I couldn't be near, like friends, like theater spaces and all of that. And then I thought back, like I have two people very near and dear to me are doing who have done very extensive terms in prison. One is my nephew, and the other one is my first boyfriend, who we've just been friends for, he's almost been away for 30 years now. And thinking about, because in the hospital I was at, I took care of inmates, and I just thought about the extra layer of isolation that this adds, because a lot of them couldn't get visits anymore. A lot of them couldn't, like they like an already limited world was even more limited. So I knew I wanted to write about an inmate, not specifically the situation I knew. And then I thought about just the things that I had to give up, and imagining all the things that in term and being away over time. So this kind of isolation and this kind of specificity over time, and the things that we have to lose. And one thing that Arios, my friend, the thing he lost was the relationship with his son. And it was even though they've been in contact. His son was a small child when he went away. His son was like 3. So it was very much up to other people to do the raising. And it's something that I can tell devastates him, and he talks about it a lot. So I thought about that moment when you know that you have to let go of one of the most important things to you and kind of step back into a kind of isolation. So that's what kind of inspired that story, because he was turning the person he loved the most over to people that he didn't necessarily trust, even though they were his family, like he didn't necessarily trust them. So that I remember when that was happening, and I remember that being very tedious for him.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about isolation, Stacy, because for isolation for theater artists is like an anomaly. We're in the one field in which we're so dependent on connectivity that it feels really strange to think about creating in a space where we don't have that, which is one of the beautiful things about doing for theater for one, because it was this invitation to engage with our craft and to think about connectivity in a moment in which we are so isolated. And with regards to what the inspiration for my piece is, it's just living through this unprecedented moment. First, being hit by COVID and feeling the vulnerability and unpredictability of that virus. And then, just when we're getting used to COVID, the murder of George Floyd, and revisiting the murder of Breonna Taylor, and suddenly thinking about the absolute vulnerability of Black bodies, both male and female. And so I think when I was trying to figure out the story that I wanted to tell, is that I wanted to lead into that sense of vulnerability that I was feeling, and to think about and think about memory, and to have a storyteller who is sharing a story that is vulnerable. She's sharing something that's very private. It's a memory that she wouldn't ordinarily share, about an incident in which a young woman who is a friend is made vulnerable. And so I think that was really the impetus for what I wanted to do. And I wanted to keep it very simple. I think in part I was thinking about the form and Zoom, and the ways in which friends of mine have told me things via Zoom that they might not necessarily tell me when we're face to face, just because I feel that COVID and this isolation has just stripped away some layers that we have put up that have been protective. And so that's, I think, was the impetus for my piece.
Yeah, the impetus for mine was having all these conversations, having speaking to people, and I was really trying to deal with it from a very Latinx perspective, which is there's colorism in and there's such racism in our as a Latinx. And one of my friends is Jamaican, but she's also Cuban, and she's also German. So we were trying to figure out, we were telling stories, and one of it had to do with, a moment of reckoning, how you can be, a boyfriend or a girlfriend of someone. And, all of a sudden, all those years that came, that you're really close, you're really, you take things for granted that you are family. And then all of a sudden, as you said, things get stripped away. And it was this moment of like, I just can't believe how you are, how the language you have is, and you're not even aware of it, and it's racist. And who am I in that particular, how have you seen me, all these years? What, and you are a person that practices Buddhism, how can that be? How do you square those two? Buddhism that's supposed to be, the good Buddhism. I guess it can be the good of any kind of religion or philosophy, but how do you square those two? How do you, even say these things, and you're not even listening to what you're saying? And then when I started reading that story to people, said, oh yeah, right. Oh, that happens in my family. So maybe what I was telling was something that happens in everybody's family. It was a very banal, perhaps, but it was like people were realizing, oh my God, you're saying what I've been going through. As a Latinx, I look white, I am seen as white, I am, and then people, will respond to that, and in my family, I look white much more than my sister. My sister's the one that, does not look white. So we are seen and perceived differently. So it was those color, kind of visuals that I was trying to get at with the piece, at this time.
Thank you for sharing, all of you. I want to pick up on something you said, Lynn, at the beginning of what you shared, just in terms of this being such a collaborative form and all of us figuring out what this means to make something collaboratively in this digital space. And also something you and Carmelita talked about with stripping away. And I wonder if each of you would share something maybe surprising you found about this process, either in the work with the actor, the director, or once we entered the performances. Has there been anything surprising to you about this way that we've all been working?
For me, it was a very collegial experience and a very different experience, because usually if I write a play, I know who I'm writing it for, I know how I'm going to cast it, and it's a very much in control. So in this, I knew that I was going to write something and I would have no control. I was going to be set up with, an actor that they were going to give me and a director that I didn't know. And the three of us had to work together and sort of figure out who we were. And I tried to give as much freedom to them, because, a piece is really, you write it, but then, there's the actor who takes it and does something with it. And then the audience that will take it, take whatever it is that they want from it. So there's so many different ways. And so the director and I spoke about, maybe even what I was intending to have. And I gave her some references of what I wanted. I wanted to be very direct, very much like, somebody telling you a story, but that really matters. And it's almost a confessional almost. So those were the things that I gave, but it was really wonderful to work with different people, new people, and they took it, so in a way it was very freeing. It was, and it was funny because at one point we were arguing about do we say black or do we say dark? And what does that mean? Because it's like you also think in Spanish and you also think, because the thing is in Spanish, I have some words that in Spanish, some words that are in English. So it's in that translation, what translates better for the audience. So we had this whole discussion, and that to me was really a good moment. And then I said to, Zulema, who was the actor and the director, I said, for all I know, you can change it whichever way you want, because you're there. You can change all my lines, whatever you want, you can say, because that's, you're alone. Who's going to see it? But I'm hoping you don't. But it's really a very trusting sort of exercise. That's what I found.
Yeah, there is a letting go that comes with this process, because you, in a way, you can't watch it, right? Like you truly cannot watch this. That is the dopest about this, honestly, is that I can't watch it. There is no way to really watch this, because as soon as Patrice sees me, we're dying laughing and it's a wrap. So it's just sort of like, even the time that I did watch it, what was funny is I couldn't sit dead on. Like it couldn't be that, because Patrice and I, that the actor, it's funny that, so Patrice was an actor I knew in New York. So it kind of was this culmination of this really beautiful thing that happened secondary to the pandemic. And I never worked with Patrice, not even like maybe a reading. I think she did one reading of one of my pieces, but that was like it. And so we kind of developed this friendship over the course of the pandemic. And then this came along and I was like, oh, this is me and her shot to like do a thing. And this is before I even knew what I was going to write. But it was just sort of like, it got to deepen this really interesting bond that her and I did not have before the pandemic, and we now have, and we have this eagerness to see one another now in a way like it's even bigger than it was before I left New York. Like we were really friendly when I left New York, and now particularly after this process and the pandemic, it's like we want to see each other all the time. We're always Marco Poloing. I'm like, and she's always telling me something random. She was like, someone was knitting tonight. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, it's just, I think that is the surprising part about it. I did know Candace and worked with Candace before this process, but just the bond with the three of us has been interesting, but particularly like this supernova of a friendship that happened because of this process. And I'd never written specifically for, and that's something I don't do typically, is I don't like this actor right here, I'm going to write for them. I never do that. But this is something I wrote specifically for her, or at least I was aiming to. And she was like, I felt it. And that was just so special to me.
Well, that is really beautiful, because one of the fears of this pandemic is that you're actually not going to make any new friends.
Right.
You know? And you're going to lose the friends that you have. And so it's kind of
Yes.
beautiful that through this, you were able to forge like a deeper friendship.
Yeah.
I'm actually super envious of that. I was really fortunate to have Issa Davis in my piece, who I've worked with quite a bit. And so just having her there brought a level of comfort. But what was the most surprising thing, I think, was the effectiveness of the technology to really replicate that feeling of proximity. The first time that I went into the box with Issa and she was there, and it was like she was right in her kitchen, I was just surprised by how present she was in my space. And also, I thought one of the beautiful things that the director did was really figure out a way to fill the frame and to activate the frame. Because so often in Zoom, we're sitting like this, we're heads, and maybe we're checking out what's going on in back of people, but we don't really see people moving about unless they're changing positions. But I thought something that she did, which was so surprising, is figuring out a way to move the actress around in that box to give us different angles while she was speaking. And also the moments in which she left frame and then she reappeared, I found super, super surprising. And then the other thing that I kind of loved was the layering of ingredients. So, the first time I saw rehearsal, it was one thing. And then the next time I came back, there was costume and there was design elements. And the next time I came back, there was different blocking. And it surprised me how much one could do in this very simple, confined format.
I will tell you, you got my friend Tiffany. And when I tell you, Tiffany directs a play. She directed The Danger. When you saw it in Brooklyn, that's who directed that.
Oh, did she? Yeah, she did a great job.
Amazing, yeah.
She has leaned into this form in a way I wish a lot of directors would.
I know.
She leans in. She's like, okay, so what can we do? And how can we figure it out? And that is like what we need, I think, to carry us forward to however long this is going to be. We really need that kind of energy.
I totally agree. It's like she didn't see the form as an impediment, that she really figured out, how can I activate this little tiny space? And I'm going to fill it with life, and it's going to be interesting and dynamic and surprising.
Yeah, I was glad she got you. I was sad I was glad she got you.
Yeah, she was great.
Well, and I to such an extent as well, all of your plays did that too. The way that you talked about how they were inspired and also fitting so much this form. It wasn't like, I wrote this for this monologue festival happening in a theater and now let's pull it into this space. They were very much in conversation with what this space would feel like and how they would be meeting audience members in this new place that we're in. The last question I have for each of you is, if you have one, if you would share like a favorite Theater for One story or experience you've had, or maybe a piece of feedback you've gotten from someone who's attended in the digital run of this season.
I'll start because, like, after living in New York and never having a show up in New York ever, it's not so much as a reading. It's like, how did something I'm in become a New York Times critic? Like, that's been the running joke. And I've been like, I'm just going to start writing 3-page plays. That's the thing. Like, but honestly, like the reports that I get from Patrice about the way people are responding, it's really like, it just reminds me like how important writers are, and the way that we break out story and the way that we can impact people with words. like that particular bit of it, and the fact that it doesn't take a lot, right? It doesn't, we've capitalized as writers on this moment in time, but also these moments where people come in and everybody's done such a fantastic job of it. And that's like, it just reminds me of I can remember being a playwright before I even dreamed of moving to New York, thinking that a play had to be one way to be a play. And if it wasn't that way, it wasn't a play. And you couldn't have told that, Stacey, that something like this would be successful. Like I really had a finite idea of what theater could be. And I think for me, it's just completely, it's constantly shifting, and that's what's exciting.
Mm.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I really loved about Theater for One is that it gave people a destination. And that's suddenly, it was very much in demand. And I had friends who were calling me up saying, I can't get a reservation. Can you get me a reservation? And there was, and I can't tell you in a moment where I have personally felt so disconnected from theater and from my craft, is just to be invited back into a space in which I felt like I was connecting with an audience, even if it was not as many people as I'm used to connecting with. It was really, really quite beautiful. I mean, for me, it was just knowing, like Stacey said, that we can continue to be writers and be artists in another form. And sometimes you forget that. Sometimes you get so bound to what it is that you do that you forget that there are other ways to express yourselves. And just, the few people who I did know who finally got to see my piece. I mean, people saw other pieces and loved it, but very few of my friends actually got to see my piece. It just was, it felt like a triumph.
Yeah, it for me, it was one of the things that, I mean, I loved working with new people, because that's always, like, oh wow, there's Sulema, who's an actor, and Rebecca, who's a director. So working with new people is great. But I think that because I was giving it to them, then sometimes I really become not a writer, not a performer, but a real audience. And it really was exciting to see your pieces. It really was exciting, but to the point where when I went and they put me in the lobby, and it was really beautiful. It was a really wonderful moment where, like, we're all writing to people that we don't know. And I'm going, I don't know why, but I'm kind of nervous. And this other person goes, me too. What are you having? Are you having a wine? And it was like little things like that. But it connected us as an audience, that I found that to be really quite moving. And also that I was getting nervous about watching a piece. It's like, why? I'm not, it's not nerves in terms of going on as a performer, but it's something else. And there was something really, really magical about it. And also seeing the pieces that were all different, but then also the ability for one of the reviewers and I haven't gotten that many reviews in the Times at all. So, but what's really great was that, she had this, image of a boat, of a ship, and how it was the architecture of a ship and inside. And she treated them all kind of like as a one, even though she mentioned what she liked. And she said of you that it was beautiful poetry. I mean, even though she said those things, there was still the image of the ship, and that we're all in it together. That was kind of very beautiful. So I think for me, it has been one of the most wonderful experiences to have been in. And even though we're all in different little boxes, we have really shared a space in a way that is quite moving.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I think we've just been but this has been something really, really, really special. And I'm so glad that I was able to do it and that I was asked to do it.
Yeah, you do think about these little lifelines that you're thrown periodically. And I felt like in the midst of a summer that was very difficult, to be invited to write something, and something that's intimate and something that's going to connect with an audience did feel special and transformative.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Thank you so much for your plays, for your artistry, and for saying yes to this many months ago, and for your time today just to reflect on this experience we have all shared and are still sharing together. So grateful for your time today. And yeah, and just to thank you. Big
And
thank you.
Jenny. And
Thank
thank
you
Brian.
very much. Thank all
Yeah,
of you.
thank you.
Take care.
We
Bye.
continue.
Yes.